You know, I grew up in country like this. My dad and I would ride our horses up to these amazing high mountain lakes. We'd ride back into some pretty remote wilderness areas with incredible streams and meadows and wildlife. I love it here. Look at this canyon. It reminds me of the Grand Canyon. You've got this little stream, you've got these steep canyon walls. How long do you suppose it would take for a stream this small to remove this much material and cut the canyon this deep? This rock has a history, just like I do and just like you do. It came from somewhere. A lot of these rocks have been dated to be 350,000 years old, up to 2 million. That's pretty old. But it might surprise you to know that all of the geological formations that we see here, the canyons, the layers, even the plants, are younger than I am. When I was born, there was nothing here but a vast forest, hundreds of feet below where we're standing right now. In fact, before 1980, most people had never even heard of Mount St. Helens. It was in that year, on May the 18th, that molten rock created a steam blast with a force of 20 million tons of TNT. Avalanche debris and other flows from the eruption laid down all of those layers rapidly, up to 600 feet thick. A couple years later, there was some more volcanic activity that created a mud flow that cut out this entire canyon. It also cut through deep bedrock, all in a couple days. Isn't it amazing what a little bit of information from the past can do to help change your view of the present and the present world around you? There are a lot of assumptions made by a lot of people about the history of the earth around us. The question is, how do those assumptions affect how we view that history? But more importantly, how do they play into how we view science and the Bible? Did God create the world in a few days or billions of years? Is mankind descended from apes, or did God create us instantly in his image? Was there a global flood that destroyed the earth, or is that a myth? In other words, is Genesis history?
When we think about the history of the earth, there are a lot of things we need to consider. But one of the most fascinating is the account of the flood. Was the whole earth covered with water? Genesis says the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. So if the flood was truly global, wouldn't there be a lot of evidence? I'd heard of a scientist who had spent over 40 years studying this question. When I spoke to him, he said he had a great place where we could see evidence for the global flood.
Steve, I gotta admit, I've been here several times, but every time I come here, it is breathtaking.
Besides being at home, Grand Canyon is my favorite place on earth.
Yeah. So, Steve, tell me, what do you see here?
When we look at Grand Canyon, we see the inside story to the ground beneath our feet. And we kind of have a layer cake here, don't we, of strata that have been eroded for our benefit to see the inside structure of the earth. These same layers are also in Colorado. We're also in Illinois, also in Pennsylvania.
So when you say sedimentary strata, you're talking about the layers that we see?
Yes. So the lowest layers are formed first. Those are sediment grains that were mixed, separated, and flowed in here from different directions and accumulated one on top of another. And then, of course, naturally, they convert to rock.
So you're saying that the solid ground we're standing on right now, if we went back in its history, it'd be liquid?
Yes. So the ocean is doing some amazing things, and water of incredible power is depositing the layers we see in the canyon.
And are there fossils in all of those layers?
There are marine fossils through all the layers. But the standard explanation is there were 17 different advances and retreats of the ocean over the North American continent, and it was extended over hundreds of millions of years.
And what is the evidence that you see here that would say that doesn't seem to make sense?
The 4,000 feet of flat-lying strata in the canyon are flat, and relative to one another, we look in between the strata layers and we don't see the passage of time in between layers.
You mean erosion?
Erosion, especially, and channeling on any great scale is not visible. And then we look at the strata themselves, and they provide evidence of rapid, very rapid sedimentation. Just minutes or hours is all that's needed to make layers.
Well, tell me about the story of these layers. I mean, how did they get here?
In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. My understanding is the ocean floor upheaval occurred. Some type of magma or earthquake propelled the oceans over the continent.
So that's why we get these marine fossils in these layers.
Yes, and we have 6 months the waters prevailed upon the earth, another 7 months or so for the water to subside. The 4,000 feet of strata probably represents the early and middle part of the global flood right here in Grand Canyon. We have other strata locally in this Grand Canyon region. That's called the Grand Staircase. We have about 10,000 feet, 2 miles thickness of strata on top of the Grand Canyon.
Higher than where we are.
Higher than where we are. And that represents the later stages of the flood and the retreat of the floodwater. This surface was beveled by retreat of floodwaters. And as the flood retreated into the newly formed ocean basins, then the continents probably uplifted, and the ark, of course, was landed in the high country in the Middle East.
Well, there's some people who say that that record is about a local flood.
I believe it's a global flood, and all the high hills, or the whole heaven, were covered, a universal statement. But that mountains have risen since then, and we shouldn't measure the depth of the floodwaters by the present mountains of the earth, which are largely created during the flood and after the flood.
Well, the fact that we have all of these layers would be unknown to us if we were standing on them, somewhere else, but they're known to us because they've been cut out. How did that happen?
Well, it was the story that we all learned in grammar school. Okay, Colorado River, over tens of millions of years, cut the Grand Canyon. Most geologists have jettisoned that idea. It's hard to sustain a canyon like this for tens of millions of years. You can't imagine a canyon enduring that long with erosion.
Is that because it would have eventually, the sides would have collapsed and broken down? Then how in the world do we get this all carved out?
Well, there are lots of theories, and personally, I like the idea of catastrophic erosion by drainage of lakes.
So after the flood, we have these large bodies of water, these lakes that are trapped.
There's evidence of the big lake in the Painted Desert, a place called Hopi Buttes, about 500 cubic miles of water in this huge lake.
And so the dam breaks, and all of that massive amount of water then is now pouring out and carving this.
Yes, and how long would it take to erode Grand Canyon? Maybe weeks, but not millions of years. Time is not a magic wand that solves all the geologic problems of the world. Jettison that way of thinking about millions of years and then start thinking about catastrophic process like you've seen at Mount St. Helens, and that'll help you understand Grand Canyon.
Everywhere we looked, Steve showed me evidence of the incredible power of moving water. It quickly laid down these enormous layers, then quickly eroded them away. Steve wanted to show me where the floodwaters first hit the continent, so he took me deeper into the canyon.
Steve, when you said you're going to bring me to the bottom, you weren't kidding, were you? We're at the bottom, aren't we?
So we're in this big side canyon to the main Grand Canyon, and we're looking at the granite basement rock, which is the core of the continent, if you will. And then we see the flat-lying strata on top of it. The boundary between the granite rock below and the Tapete sandstone above is this surface we call the Great Unconformity.
Why does it appear to be such a stark line? I mean, it's clear.
I think it's an erosional boundary of colossal scale. We're looking at something that shows the magnitude of flood flow over a surface.
And is it just here?
The Great Unconformity is continent-wide. I've seen it, I believe, in the Middle East. It's over in Europe. It's in Africa, and here it is under the North American continent.
So we've got this layer. How thick is this layer? What goes up from here?
Well, we have the Sauk mega sequence here, if you will, 1,000 feet of sandstone, shale, limestone that goes continent-wide. There are 4 other big sequence packages of strata that sit above it. Those are also very continuous like this. What we're seeing here is rather representative of the rest of the world.
It makes one really question the notion that this all happened because of a small local flood. We're talking about something enormous.
The power-moving water was beveling and pulverizing rock, depositing great thicknesses of layers and calling our minds to think about a global flood.
The conventional story is entirely different, though. It would say that there is a lot of time between each of these layers.
Some people have said that the Great Unconformity boundary here represents 500 million years.
You mean between the granite we see and that first layer of the sedimentary rock?
Yeah, they say that there may be 500 million years there. Okay, and that's what their explanation of Earth history would ask them to consider. Yet when you come here and look at this, nearly a featureless plain. It's not exactly a plain, but it's a gently rolling surface. And would that be the product of billions of years? Or would that be the product of the power of water planing off a surface? Time is foreign to a good explanation here. And so we want to explain what we see. Everywhere we look, we see the power of water. And it's water on a colossal scale, and that's the story here in Grand Canyon. It's not a little water and a lot of time. It's a lot of water and a little time.